right, here we go.
Whoa.
Good evening and welcome to Slate School and the Education Idea Lab. Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the next event in our Education Idea Lab, which is a unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. And this thought-leading event convenes leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. So thank you for joining us for our conversation with Ted Dintersmith. We are thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. So I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, and then we're just going to hear from our incredible guest. Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school in North Haven, Connecticut. And here, education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and just really inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. So at Slate School, we formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experience for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape in education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, just like today's, are always free and open to the public. So we are so delighted to have all of you with us today. We have learners joining us from 6 continents, and we definitely invite you to submit additional questions as comments on Facebook, and we will select some of those questions to ask the panelists today as well. So, Ted Dintersmith. So he's co-authored Most Likely to Succeed, Preparing Our Kids for the Innovation Era. And he was also executive producer of the acclaimed documentary, Most Likely to Succeed. During the 2015-2016 school year, Ted traveled to 100 schools in all 50 states. And his book, What School Could Be, Insights and Inspiration from Teachers Across America, discusses all that he learned during his immersive experience. So in November of 2020, he also launched a platform by the same name designed to support the student-led learning model in response to the tremendous challenges schools are facing. And this platform, which has a variety of resources, has been praised by educators everywhere in general, and specifically by Tony Wagner, who called it hands down the best resource for educators, parents, and community members who want to reimagine their schools. Pretty good praise. So prior to his role in education, Ted was involved in innovation and venture capital. He is a partner emeritus with Charles River Ventures. He holds a PhD in engineering from Stanford University and an undergraduate degree from the College of William and Mary, where he earned high honors in physics and English. I could go on, I really could, but then we'd never get to the conversation, Ted. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
It's great to be here. I should say nothing after that introduction, so I really appreciate it. Other than the takeaway is I spent way too long in school.
No, there's no such thing, I think. School is everywhere, right? School is everywhere.
If you think about it the right way, yes.
Yeah. Your kind of school is everywhere, actually. So let's get right to it. I'm going to ask a big question first because I just have been wondering exactly how you'd answer it. So after all the travels, after all the work and the listening and the conversations with stakeholders of all kinds, I wonder if you have a different view of what the purpose of education is. Has your answer changed? Is it the same?
I think a lot has changed. You know, it depends on the time frame. If you went back, say 15 years ago, I thought education's simple. You know, I went to school, so I'm an expert, which I think is all too often what people think. And if you said, what do we need to do? I would say, you know, higher test scores, more kids graduating from high school, more kids graduating from college. If we could just do that, everything would be fine. And, you know, and we can get into it, but then just from experience with my kids and experience professionally, I started to really think differently about it. And, that's sort of defined the last decade of my life, fairly intensely. And I'd say a lot of things have changed, and you can see it in my work. But one, I think, would be, I want to phrase this the right way. I didn't 10 years ago have a particularly informed view of teachers. Like everybody likes to say your teachers are great, and so I sort of think, like, yeah, teachers are great, but it wasn't like with specificity and with emotion. It was just like what you say when you're at a baseball game and they honor the teacher, they let them, go in the field and sing the national anthem or something. And then you travel, right? And you realize, I mean, my gosh, this is the most dedicated set of people I could ever imagine. And back when you could do these things live, I would, and I still do, even virtually, I'll do it. But, I just say, I'll stay as long as anybody wants to talk to me. And so often teachers would stay and stay, and they wanted to be that last person to talk. And my gosh, you just sort of like how much they cared about their kids, how much they understood they were getting handed a bunch of really mind-numbingly dumb policies and priorities, and how hard they'll fight. It's just like, whoa. And so that definitely is I've gone from saying, yeah, teachers are fine, to like, oh my gosh, this is truly a national treasure. And I think we need to get the rest of society on track with that and start actually backing up that view. So that's changed. I think I've spent a lot of time in the last 5 years really trying to understand change models. And it sounds like a flip saying, but I think it's all about the change model. I think people on this in this session, we all have a pretty good idea what school could be about. That's why I wrote this book, and I picked great examples from every state. It's happening everywhere. It's happening at the Slate. You just were telling me before we went live all the great things going there. The question is, right now, do we have an exact percentage? No, but it's really 1%, 2%, 3% of kids get that kind of wonderful experience. And the rest are really grinding through a day they don't believe in, the teachers don't believe in, because we have a bunch of policymakers, and I say it, I think it's fair to say, I think we have a bunch of education policymakers who care more about data than children. And until we change that, we're not going to change the equation with this.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think I think just like teachers, those people didn't go into this to make such boneheaded decisions. I think they went into it for the same reason. And I think we all want the same thing, but our ideas of how to get there are so very different.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping
tonight. I do. I love to talk to legislators. I'm a good person to unleash on legislators, because I'm not, like when a teacher says you're screwing up our lives and ruining kids, they say, oh, you got an axe to grind. I'm like the guy from, no bag of donuts here, so I've just got no axe to grind other than to say, here's what I've seen and here's what I've observed. Yeah. And one of the things I think is fair to say is, if we insisted our legislators take the high stakes exams that keep many kids from graduating from high school and publish their scores, those high stakes tests would disappear overnight. I guarantee you the number of legislators that could pass 11th grade math exams is next to none. And I just think it's a fair thing to say that if we're going to insist kids pass something to get a high school degree, it sure as heck ought to be something that we use in life, and it ought to be something that you, who are pushing that issue on our schools, actually use and are good at, right? That's fair.
Yeah, I think I think that there's a lot of focus on calculating and a lot less focus, talking about STEM in actual problem solving, doing the real work of math. We're not teaching that because we're not giving kids problems to solve.
Yeah.
Real problems that matter to them. And we don't have a dearth of those. We have plenty of those. We're just not considering children as people who can solve them. And yet they might be the best at it because they're not all dinged up like we are.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think what we talk about here tonight might make us a little bit uncomfortable or maybe a little bit angry. And because I think that we ought to have a great system of education for our kids. And I think that, most everybody on some level, especially in the gut, I think everybody I talk to believes in this kind of education. they know it feels right. When I talk to so many parents that come to see the school, and we talk about it, and they say, gee, that feels right. I didn't have an education like that, but it feels right. But I think for so many people, there's still a little fear that pops up that keeps them coming back for conventional education over and over again.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the antidote is for that, but I wonder, like, what do you say to people whose kids are doing okay in a pretty good district? In a gold standard school like Eisenhower, what do you say to them to say, gee, this is not what you think it is?
Yeah, you've raised so many great questions and issues. The film Most Likely to Succeed, we actually started by saying, like, let's look at the modern adult life. What do you have to do as an adult? And then work back and say, what kind of school experiences prepare you for that? And looked all over the country, found this school, did this film. And what's interesting is that when people see, and then the thing I did, which three people sort of said, I got a lot of flack for this decision, but I turned down Netflix after it premiered at Sundance. And instead, I just funded an effort to take it directly to school communities, because I said that if people just see it on their laptop, like, first, I don't believe we really learn anything on a laptop. So I hope this hour is an exception. We're going to try to make sure
Ted.
the pressure is really on. I sort of dug us in a hole there.
I think we're going to be okay.
But if what happens is you find there are these change agents at schools, and they don't even know of each other. They don't realize that a lot of us are thinking the same way. And so I said, let's take it directly to school communities. And when people see the film, like, it's parents want their kids in that kind of school. Kids want to be in that kind of school. Teachers want to teach in that kind of school. Business people want kids going through that kind of school. And yet, that film's been out for several years, and it's not like every school is suddenly snapping into place. And I think two things drive it, right? I think that one is college admissions. And I think we can't overestimate the overhang of college admissions on the lives of our kids.
Yep.
And whether your school is sending a lot of kids to college or a few kids to college, it still permeates every aspect of the school day. Because I'll go to schools in under-resourced communities. I'll say, you could just run the fancy rich schools, and here's how. And I don't get anywhere really with that argument. And I think, for understandable reasons, is that the reaction I think people have is, I want the same opportunities for my kids as those kids over the way. And so if we have a bunch of people obsessing about college admissions, and if college admissions is perceived and largely tied to a bunch of numbers, it's very difficult to change things. And so I funded this thing called the Coalition for College, that is, in theory, opening the door to looking at real portfolios of student work. I feel like you can learn, my secret in venture capital, I did pretty well in venture capital, is I never looked at where somebody went to school. I never asked for their grade point average or their SAT score. I mean, none of that mattered to me. I actually started shying away from academic superstars. But I'd ask them, I say, send me 3 writing samples that will tell me what I should know about you. And that's what I made my judgment on. And so when these admissions officers tell me how hard it is to look at real work, I'll say, I looked at real work for 25 years. I mean, I know you can look at something pretty quickly. I mean, if their best work is not very good, it's like a very quick thing. And if it's quite good, you don't feel like you're wasting time. You can just sort of, oh, that's interesting, and follow up on something specific. But I feel like if college admissions changed, K through 12 would change overnight. I think that's a big issue. And I think that's the fear factor, is a lot of parents just say, yeah, I'm sort of tempted to do this, but they sort of clutch up and say, wait a minute. And particularly if they're in an environment where others are sort of doing same old,
yeah,
and it takes courage. I know firsthand, it takes courage to say to kids, I don't care how this works out. Don't let your college placements define you. Don't even go to college if you don't want to, which I have a data point on that one as well. Yeah. And so I just feel like if that becomes an obsession, if it's the decals on your card to define your success as a parent, that impedes a lot of innovation in schools. And the unfortunate thing is, it's very hard to find lots and lots of winners in that process. There are a lot of kids that feel like they failed, they feel dumb, they feel, They just didn't cut it academically, and they feel like they've fallen short when they've got amazing talents that got ignored. But I'll tell you, you go to the top colleges and you talk to these kids. This isn't a uniformly upbeat, positive situation. There are a lot of kids who feel like no matter what I do, it wasn't quite good enough. I often walk around these campuses like everybody feels they don't belong there. I got in because of my race. I got in because of my family was rich. I got it because of that. Like everybody,
Yeah.
And you just realize, what are we doing, right? I mean, at a certain point, you said before, I mean, like I try to be joyfully angry, if that's possible, but we should be angry about this. I mean, what are we doing to our kids? We're ruining childhoods. And I'm old enough, but probably older than anybody else on here. I graduated from high school in 1970. I don't remember when I was going to school doing homework. I've been back to my high school, actually been back several times in the last couple of years. There are still seniors there taking the same courses I took. It's just they work all the time on it, and I didn't. I was just sort of, when my classmates and I took the SAT, we had to read the instructions. Like, well, what's this about? Just kind of, you spend the first 10 minutes reading this, and it's like we've said, we sort of said curriculum, have we updated that? Not really, I think, in any substantial way. So it's the same obsolete curriculum, but we've upped the stakes, and we said, let's fix education by doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on standardized, very obsolete curriculum. And I could explain what I mean by that, instead of working back from what the modern world requires, but also all the advantages the modern world offers. I mean, like, who's getting ahead today? It's the people that can be highly productive because they know how to use things that are out there. But if you try to leverage resources in school, that's cheating, right? It's like, it's stunning to me, and I could go on, so you'll stop me. But anyway,
No,
it's stunning. It is absolutely stunning to me that we still teach math in grades 8 through 12 as though something called a computer had never been invented. And I have published papers going back to when you didn't have that option. I mean, I still have it somewhere. It's right back here behind me, is that this 1,000-page book written by these two Russians that are these tables of integration substitutions. And I spent 6 months doing that. Well, now I would just put that integral on photomath and it would tell me the answer. It's like, but no, we can't let anybody take math, assuming that computational resources are right next to you. Let's still drill on and I think it's a fair standard. I said, should you hold yourself to the standard of being at least as innovative as divisions of motor vehicles? I think that's a reasonable benchmark. And if Department of Motor Vehicles were still operating the way schools do, or the way standardized curriculum does, you still have to crank start a Model T engine to get a driver's license.
You're right.
Like,
You're right.
What?
You're right.
What in the world? What?
You're right.
How can that make sense? And even the Department of Motor Vehicles, you don't have to drive a stick shift even. I mean, they're pretty, like, they're at least thinking a little bit about what's already done for you instead of saying you've got to do the stuff that was always done. It's crazy.
You're right. You're so right. And it also seems like when they're wondering what's not working, because they're, always weighing the cow instead of feeding the cow. Instead of looking at what's really not working, they find one thing that they like, schools, and then they make a big box of it. And then they invite every teacher to teach exactly like that teacher taught that day. And boy, that can really change the morale of a group of teachers who got into this for the love of it and the art of it, and to share what was special about themselves with kids.
Yeah. It's if it were working toward a positive end, it would be understandable. When it's actually impairing the futures of the kids, destroying teacher morale, and you say, let's keep doing it, but maybe up the stakes on it.
Yeah.
Like, you have to say, what have we lost our minds? And we're losing minds. We're losing millions of minds. And in what school could be, I profile all these great learning experiences created by teachers all across the country. But when I ask them, like, where'd the idea come from? It was never somebody else's. It was theirs. And it became quite personal. And they worked really hard to make it happen. But I don't think people bemoan long hours when they're doing something they're passionate about. But they
Absolutely.
also said, and this is key, and so administrators on this, webinar, every single one of them said, somebody had my back. Like, I created this, but my principal had my back. Or a
Yeah.
principal does something amazing and the superintendent had their back, because those grumpsters are inevitable. They come out of the woodwork. They said, this is different. This isn't how I went to school, blah, 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 blah. And somebody's got to believe in these people. And they sort of play it forward, right? Because they create something, but almost always it was empowering students to in turn create something they're passionate about. And we just lose sight of that basic aspect of human nature. People who can set their own goals, chart their own course, will go to the ends of the earth to achieve or exceed them. People that are told what they have to do generally don't do it unless they happen to be kids in a well-off family that will say, I'll get you a new iPhone, or I'll buy you this iPad, or I'll buy you a BMW or whatever.
Yep.
And you can bribe a kid through that, or you can put fear-base them through it by saying that's the other thing that happens. You got to get good grades, because if you don't, you won't get a good job and you'll be left behind. You got to get into this college and everything else. And it's just like, oh my
I know.
God.
And it happens even before that. It happens before kids even go to school. You're not going to be able to do that in kindergarten.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to do that when you go to middle school. You're not going to be able to do that kind of thing when you go to high school, and we just keep scaring kids to death. But I guess I feel like being a teacher is a really brave job right now. You have to be brave. And it's hard to be brave, I think, for new teachers coming up, because they have no idea. I don't think they're being trained at all. To do this kind of work, to actually, I think there's actually one step before the teacher innovator, and that's listening to the children. Because when you listen to the kids, all the ideas come. Work is much less difficult.
Yeah. And the younger the kid, the better the ideas.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
It's like if you want to really understand what we should do, get a planning session with 7-year-olds. Lay it out for us.
Absolutely.
Well, they're 17, it's just like, I just want to get through it. I just want to get through it. And and we, it's our fault, right? I mean, that's what we're doing to them. And and I think you have to really ask, what the price we're paying for this is. And it's an enormous price. And so that's why, but back to your point, I want to really build on that about teacher. First, you're absolutely right about teacher prep. I mean, one of the frequent observations I get from teachers that they share with me is they feel like their school of education or their in-field professional development resources didn't help them at all doing the types of things that they really entered the profession to do, the types of things we show in most likely to succeed. And which has really led to this resource, the What School Could Be resource, but also one of the things I think we've done a good job on, I hope a great job on, is to almost clear the way. So that's why I did the film. And that's why we've got these great videos you can share. We really encourage people to sort of get your communities to step back and think about, what are our goals here? I'm a big fan of Ed Leader 21. What do we want our kids to get good at through these precious years of school? But I also say with the Portrait of the Graduate initiative, the more granular it is, the more it's done, by a family with a child, which might be different from what a teacher does in their classroom, which might be different from what a principal does in the school. But I always have a bit of regret when, like, the State Department of Education says, here is everybody's portrait of the graduate. Back to that basic thing. When people have voice in setting their own goals, they will go to the ends of the earth to achieve them. And if we could keep that in our focal point when it comes to education, we would unleash so much potential, because as you know, these kids that have often been beaten down year in and year out, one of the throwaway lines I have in my book is that the one SAT word every student knows is proficiency, because so many of them have been told you lack proficiency. You're in the bottom third, you're in the bottom half, you're in the bottom quartile, whatever, on a bunch of things that really are relatively orthogonal to what's going to make them successful in life. And if we can keep their confidence up, those kids, differentially actually, those kids over the rich kids will spring into life when they're given a challenge that they can actually have a voice in and create. And it's sort of interesting, right? When you travel all over the country and see all sorts of things, so many of the kids that are in schools where the test scores aren't great, when they do have that courage, when they are able to start unleashing these kids on authentic projects, holding them to a high standard. This isn't, paper cutouts or something.
Right.
These are meaningful projects where you're going to be reviewed by the faculty and parents and members of the community and held to a high standard. The kids that we often think of as the kids that are at risk academically are actually the kids that blow you away. And the kids we actually think, whew, everything's set there. They're doing great academically, are the kids that freeze up with that. They say, wait a minute, like this is ambiguous. Like,
Right.
what do I need to do to get an A?
Yeah, you're not telling me what the parameters are.
Make
Where's my
it
rubric?
clear. Make it clear what I need to do to get an A. And those kids are the ones in for a rude awakening when they get out of school, because nobody wants to hire. I call them the go fetch a dog biscuit kid. Who wants somebody reporting to them that just comes back to you every hour saying, what do I do next? What do I do next? And that's what a lot of employers tell me.
Yeah.
They'll say, I hire these kids. They look great academically. I think they'll be wonderful. They are motivated. They are talented. They are smart.
Yeah.
But they're constantly wanting to know what they should do next. And I can't just say, we have an issue here, understand it and figure out what we could do to address it. That is just like they freeze up. And that begs the question, which is better preparation for life? And ambiguous, open-ended, bold challenges that empower kids to come up with creative solutions and stick with it till they accomplish something they're proud of, or factory polynomials under time pressure. How can we get this so wrong?
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel so bad for those kids. Actually, I feel terrible for them because we've really we haven't done right by them, because they were poised to do their very best, and they did their best. But they did their best, and it was in a system that it didn't do anything for them. We haven't done what we should for them.
Yeah.
And
one thing though, before we get into gloom and doom. So I want to counter it because I think we're starting to see some remarkable things. I think kids are starting to get onto this. And I think once you start to see kids realizing that if they go rogue a bit from academics, from the structured, standardized curriculum, if they don't fill their high school, sophomore, junior, and senior year with 14 AP courses, if they actually start creating and inventing things, I think that the word is getting out that oftentimes there's a misperception about what college admissions people want. So that, helps. I think a lot of kids are starting to realize they don't need more formal academic instruction to be off and running. And that could be off and running in a new economy career or
Right.
traditional economy career, or teams of young adults in a blend of those. And I think the more we can highlight that, because we do live in a world where anybody can learn whatever they want on their own. It's never been easier to learn, which really plays to, I think, the reason most people go into the teaching profession. They don't go into the teaching profession to cover this minutia piece of content on this day of this month. They go in to engage and inspire kids. And I think when we start to see that, and that's why we try so hard, and this new platform we're releasing will make it even better, to shine a light on what's working and not say copy what Slate School's doing or copy what this, but be inspired by it. We expressly in the film Most Likely to Succeed say, please, 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 don't copy what this school did. They did what worked for them and their community. Be bold, but create what will work for you and your community. And I think it's as well, I think, the reality is, I think more and more kids are going to find they can move forward in life in a really wonderful way without college. I'm not anti-college, but I think we.
No, I know what you're saying, though. I know what you're saying, and I think that we should encourage that. I think we should say, listen, find what your passion is, follow it. It might not, the path might not be college, but I want to get back to something that you were saying before, because I thought it was so interesting. You're talking about how you read, the essays of these, potential hirings.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I know that there are admissions people out there on this call, and I know that they want to find the students that really belong in their school, that really will thrive there, because not every school is the same. I mean, thank heavens we have, thousands of beautiful colleges, something for everyone, or something for most people. But we're all trying to get into the same few. And so I guess I'm wondering, what do you think the ideal criteria would be for college admissions, and And how could we help them to get through that in the time that they have? I mean, I recognize college admissions people, they don't have all day to read, to read all the essays.
Well, I'm a big fan. As much as I think we need to have large changes urgently, I'm a big fan of sort of the small steps lead to big change model.
Yes.
Because I think that's how things change. And so when I've been in front of college admissions officers and I've done a bunch of events with them, I beg them. I actually put up money to try to fund this, to say give applicants an option. You can apply with the Common App the same old way, be one of 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 applicants who are all duking it out on that basis. But if you want, we're offering, a portfolio of passion path. And so if you think your best foot forward is one or more examples of you at your best, where you created something bold that made your world better, and you're going to explain to us how it did, apply that way. And we'll still look at some of the other stuff to make sure there's not a massive disconnect, but we will value you for evidence that you've been able to affect positive change in your community through your ability to learn how to learn, leverage resources, and overcome challenges. And see where that takes you. Because I guarantee you won't find 5,000 people applied that way the first year. It'll be 50 or 100. But I always ask colleges, like, what kind of alum are you going to be proud of, right? I mean, you're going to want somebody that's bold, that's somebody that's, willing to step up and really challenge things. You're going to want somebody that is self-directed.
Right.
And so ripple that down. That should be what you value in your applicant pool, and communicate that you're going to do that. And I think when we start to do that, and you're starting to see real softening. I mean, a lot of schools are dumping the SAT and ACT. That's great.
We have a special opportunity right now, I think.
And I think when parents start to see that, like, to take the AP exam, you need to have a camera behind you watching this, and a special software on your keyboard and everything else. And you start to say, what is that testing really? I mean, what is that testing? And one of my hot buttons, or whatever you call that, I can mix my metaphors here, but the College Board is awash in cash. I think the cash reserves are $850 million. That if they're on this call, I'm stepping on your toes intentionally. They pay themselves enormously high salaries. They swim in data. I would say, how about this? Let's start testing some AP students 3 months after they took the AP exam without prep. Give them the same exact exam and see what their scores did. Because here's what would happen. If they hadn't crammed before it, those 5s and 4s would turn into 1s and 2s. And so if in fact a kid, because anytime anybody actually looks at what's retained in those types of instruction-driven models, the results are discouraging. They don't retain it because they never applied it. It never meant anything to them other than to get a score. And so if we're going to spend all this money and you're awash in funding, how about getting some data that sheds light on whether any of this is really retained? Because I think if we did that, we'd say, oh my God, the one study that was done, Dartmouth did it, was what AP psychology, right? So they said, took the students who came into Dartmouth with a 5 in AP psychology, didn't give them the AP exam again, but gave them the basic intro final for psychology.
Right.
The students who had 5 on AP psychology, they failed. That was revealing. But what was really revealing is they then made them take intro psych, and they didn't do any better than the kids who had never taken psych before. And so you have to say, all the stress, all the differential advantage those AP courses give to the rich kids, all the anxiety over whether my score is a 5 or a 4, or God forbid, a 3 or a 2, a 2, can you believe it? And then when you actually start to peel it back and look at, did it lead to any real learning? Or was it just a test of short-term memorization, agilely moving through low-level questions quickly? And if there's an essay, you write something really formulaic and not controversial, because that's the essay that won't hurt your score. Bingo. There you go. Why are we doing that?
The recipe. I don't know. Why are we teaching recipes? Doesn't make any sense. I want to hear about the platform. So for people who don't know about it, and I hope there aren't many that don't know about it. Your platform is amazing. It's got all sorts of resources on it. I love when you click on it the first time. If you go to the about, my favorite thing about it is that you say, "This isn't about us." This is about you.
I love that too. They did such a great job of that. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's great. And it really is. I think it really, I think it addresses a lot of questions that I hear from people.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to hear because I know that you're expanding it.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear about what your plan is and what's
Sure.
happening.
So I started traveling with Most Likely to Succeed. And a lot of people would say, oh, we'd love to do that, but we could never do that. That's beyond our reach. That's just not true, but that's what they think. And I think the really informed point of view, and it was sort of a like wake up call for me, but helped me understand things, is that people would say to me, that's great, but I know what happened at High Tech High. They started from scratch with a lot of money. We are an existing school with very limited resources. Their challenge in starting something from scratch is wholly different from our challenge of changing an existing school. Back to schools of education. If somebody knows of one school of education in the United States that offers a course on how do you change an existing school, I want to know about it because I have yet to find one. And I've looked at a lot of the places you would expect to find it. No courses on how you change an existing school, none. So that's what we've been trying to do is to say, but the other thing that happened when I traveled, this tells a big part of what happened is I would go to these schools that had watched the film and they, back in the days when you have a DVD for it, and there'd be teachers in groups clustered around a laptop watching a scene from the film. And they'd be saying, look at how they have students debating with each other. Look at how they're publicly exhibiting work. Look at how, they're giving feedback to each other. And, it's like, and that sort of made me think, what if we took the big overarching things people loved about that school environment, students driving their learning, real world connection with the learning, assessments that were authentic instead of bubble test bullshit stuff. A more caring and connected community. We didn't really highlight it, but there's no bullying that goes on at that school because kids work in teams on things and it's not uber competitive. And then maybe most importantly, how do you get your community excited about it? And then I built on a lot of the work that was done. It's sort of spun and taken a different direction, but School Retool at Stanford, the D school there, I thought they had some really wonderful people and great ideas, but it was this small steps leading to those 5 big changes. And then we sort of picked some things from the film, but a lot from my travels and just, we worked our tails off to try to find things in the field that really gave great examples. So it's not really our idea of what works, it's your idea of what works. I mean, I'm just trying to amplify the great things that you're doing, you being collectively the educator force in America, and then curated and sort of suggested steps, thinking of small confidence building steps that you can do in 20 minutes or most 2 days of class time so that it's not overwhelming. And then we really encourage, we say the kiss of death is if a principal says everybody has to do this. We say, please don't do that. Or if superintendent says every school has to do it. We really encourage principal who wants to try this or something like this and tell us what works. Superintendent, any schools up for trying this process and tell us how it's going. I started working on this model with the incredible Sir Ken Robinson. So we formed something formally a couple of years ago, and maybe now 3 years ago. And one of the elements he really pushed for is more community to what we're doing. So if you go to whatschoolcouldbe.org now, there are these great resources, but you're kind of on your own with sharing them. And then, last year was a tough year for everybody, but it was tragic with Sir Ken. And I mean, just heartbreaking. But I sort of feel like, okay, dang, I can't let him down. Like he said, like, you got to get some community to this. You got to get going. And we found this vendor. It just kind of was just one of those things that has exactly what we need. So we've integrated our platform with their basic technology platform. So you can, it's now mobile as well as on your laptop. So we got mobile apps in the process.
Wow.
We're formally launching it March 9th around South by Southwest. I've got a session there with Kate Robinson, Ken's daughter, about, Sir Ken Robinson, looking back, looking forward. But when you sign up for this, suddenly you're in this community where you could set up your own private group for your buddies, your own private group for your school or some subset of your school, a private group across your district, the broader community, but it also allows us to offer our own, but other people's coaching resources. And The thing is, I pay for a master license, and I said, are you sure? Any educator in the world can use this for free. So everything we have is free. And I will go out on a limb here. This will be better professional development resources than anything you could pay through the nose for. I mean, because not because of me, because of you, right? I mean, like I really felt like there's no way in the world I could charge people for their own work. Like I'm just going to make this free. But I mean, it means that you can suddenly, because as you know, innovation needs team support. And so suddenly, if you're a cluster of 4 teachers feeling frustrated in a school, sign up, form your own little working group. We've got great resources you can share that doesn't really piss people off, but at least makes people step back and think, maybe they're onto something with this idea of rethinking our school. And then start with these little simple things like 20 minutes of curiosity time in a class period where we bring it to life. We do, I think, great work on video. So we have these short, like 15-minute-ish videos that say, here's what it is, here's why it's important, here's a master practitioner walking you through it, here's students in action, here's student perspective on it. And kind of like, if you've never done it before, maybe think about doing A, B, C, and D. Not you have to. And all we really hope for is in a school or a district, a few people try it and then start reaching out to others. Hey, sign up, like tap into this, be part of our group and give us your take on it. And will everything work? No, everything won't work. But I'll tell you where it's happening. The site now has this great documentary done by this team in Hawaii called the Innovation Playlist. I mean, it's changing. Like they report students actually like loving to be in school, debating each other, creating bold initiatives. But teachers reporting it's the first time we've morale up, but also this was the first time we had a chance to work with each other, which is so important, right? Like it's so important,
And could you work with people just not part of your own school community? So say you were
you could do it.
You're the only one.
You could set up your Slate group. You and have one large group and offer your own coaching sessions or ask us to help. I've hired several people to sort of be support in the field for anybody who wants help. We're just trying to get change groups mobilized, but have a really efficient way to communicate with each other. So it's like your own private Facebook page without all the privacy issues and data issues and everything else. It's just yours.
Yeah. So and you give confidence to these people who are trying to be the change agent in their school.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to spend the money to develop this from scratch, which would have been, not a small amount of money and would have almost certainly failed. And I hired this design group and they said, well, you ought to look at this group called Mighty Networks is their name. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is pretty much everything I was going to fund, which would have been a big check and more, and more. And so Julie, you can offer coaching sessions and invite lots of different, groups or the broader community.
And I want to hear from other people, right? I know what I know. I want to hear from others. Yeah.
Draw on the things on the site now, but also as people create their own, communicate back to us what you've created and we make it that much better. So we're hoping to get a network effect here where it just gets better and better because it's more and more examples of the great work in the field. So I'm excited.
I'm excited too. That's incredible. Well, so speaking of your excitement, what do you, I mean, you've done something amazing, I think, I mean, your travel, I mean, your life.
Got my Zoom camera to work.
But you're traveling to 50 states, you're going everywhere, you're listening, you're doing all of these things. And I just, is there some magic pill where, what do you credit your spirit of curiosity?
Well, it gets back to, I mean, the genesis of this, which is I came out of my career in venture thinking, for much of that time, that's another evolution. For much of that time, I thought innovation's an unambiguous good. And then I realized that as we make some people more productive, we're putting other people out of work.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's not slowing down. I mean, if anything, that's blisteringly accelerated during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I started to ponder, what's it mean when a few do better and better and more do worse and worse? And then don't blame me for it. It wasn't my deal. We were the first round investors in Twitter. And something that seemed cute and innocuous, Facebook, we all thought, isn't this nice? We can connect with friends. And, I'm off of it now, but anyway, I'd put up pictures of my kids and whatever else, all this stuff we thought was unambiguously good and entertaining and useful. You realize there's a dark side. And I started saying 10 years ago to kind of friends that if we don't rethink school priorities profoundly, I'm not sure our democracy will survive. And 10 years ago, that was like a conversation killer. People just didn't want to have that conversation with me. And I think, because I had basically retired from venture, I think they wouldn't say it to my face, but I'm sure my friends were, they go to home at night and they say, Ted, retirement's not agreeing with that guy. I think he's gone off the deep end. This thing about democracy collapsing, I mean, that is nuts. And then, 4 or 5 years ago, people started to come back and say, maybe this isn't so crazy. And I think now anybody who thinks that our democracy is a lock, that it's not in jeopardy, is not paying attention. I mean, it's clearly fragile beyond words. And so to me, that's the fight we have. And the more people that come out of school empowered to create, to contribute, to engage with each other in an informed way, we have a chance to have a great democracy going forward and great lives collectively going forward. And the more kids are trained to get good at exactly what machines do instantly, perfectly, for free, the more they're told that your goal in life is to just beat out your classmates on something you think is bullshit you don't care about, the more that defines the school life. I mean, good luck changing that in a graduation speech. I mean, we go to these graduations and people say, go forward and make your world better. But, we spent 12 to 16 years saying the exact opposite. Do something you don't care about, jump through a hoop you didn't have anything to do with in the first place, learn something you're never going to use as an adult, and beat out your classmates. And then the ones that succeed go into investment banking, and everybody else is left holding a hollow, empty bag of gerunds and factoring polynomials and balancing chemical equations, a whole bunch of other stuff they're never going to use, and missing out on the process is all these great things they could get good at school. All these great character traits they had when they were 3 and 4, those could be flourishing for these kids by the time they're teenagers. And you just have to say, now the good news is school is local, right? So this isn't anywhere near as daunting as global warming, right? If everybody on this agreed on a global warming, we're still a tiny drop in a massive bucket. So we need to change the entire bucket in global warming. A family can just say, I'm not going to beat my kid into submission to get into a certain college. I'm going to trust my kid, help them find things they want to learn about, help them develop skills they care about. And I'm not going to worry about whether they go to college, if they go to college, which college they go to, because if they are a creative, purpose-driven problem solver, they're going to be just fine in life. Yes. Any classroom teacher can do that. Schools can do it if they get the parent community behind them, which is why a given school doesn't have to wait for the rest of the world to come around. It's actually those kids that benefit from that are in a differential advantage if we think about it right, and equip them with the skills that matter. And that's why I'll keep picking on it, but grade 8 through 12 math. I mean, if we actually taught math that mattered instead of the math that your smartphone does instantly, right. Kids would I've got this nascent thing I'm working on where my dare is that we could equip our middle and high school kids with skills that they could acquire readily, that they would enjoy, that they could use to solve important problems in their community or address important issues, but leave high school having already demonstrated the ability to make more than most college graduates. And people say, well, that couldn't possibly happen. But I got a whole book full of those examples, right? And yes. It's not that, we in this country, we tend to think we'll take an obsolete high school curriculum and bolt on AP computer science and say we're innovative. Maybe we'll tack on a first robotics program or something. And we saw it's not at all about that. No. It's about leveraging tools. Kids, your 7-year-olds can create their own websites.
Yes.
Right. But you go to Upwork and look at what you can make if you're a really good website designer. You can make 25, 30, 40 bucks an hour. Do the math on that, what that is for an annual salary. That's more than most college graduates make.
Sure.
And I've got this whole list of, if anybody out there is interested in running with this, let me know. I'm looking for an entrepreneur to run with it because I've got this list of digital economy proficiencies, social media campaigns, email marketing campaigns, graphic design, video production, audio mixing. Like here we are in this. Here's like an enterprising 12-year-old that mastered the intricacies of Zoom would be crushing it economically now if they could market their services.
Right.
Good luck finding a high school, a community college, or a college in the country that would say Zoom proficiency skills.
Right. Yeah, they're not interested. They're not interested.
I call it the low-hanging orchard.
Yeah, but you know what, Ted, what's happening is you're listening, right? You're listening to what the world is looking for. You're not just imagining that what it's looking for is something that is filled by what we've been doing for the last 100 years in school. You're listening. You're listening, and
I try. Yeah,
I think that, but I think that's in short supply. I have to say I can't let you off this call today because before I ask you this one question, and then we could go on to something else. But I have to be sure to ask this. At Slate School, we've been working for the last year, reimagining what an upper school at Slate School would look like. We've been a K-6 school. We're K-3 now. We grow, a grade level each year. But in 2024, our sixth graders are going to age out, and we're committed to creating an upper school. And one of the things I will just say, I'm reminded about by your conversation here tonight is just this ability to listen. And we're actually reimagining an old church building to be an acoustically beautiful space where people can disagree and hear each other, and hear what the problems are in the world. And we're so excited about that. We're so excited to offer that to our students, and we're so excited to offer it to our community here, and offer these young people as potential problem solvers for our world. But I would be remiss, and my whole community would be furious at me if I didn't ask you what do you think? What are some of your wise words for us as we go into this creation of this upper school, because we are in that wonderful position of starting from scratch.
I like try to get myself off the hook by saying, so much about what you're going to do. You don't need to ignore advice from outsiders. So I once asked somebody, I still remember the discussion I had with an adult. I went to him and I asked him for advice, and he said, I never give any advice because somebody might actually listen to me. But I will say a couple things. I feel like back to this bold dare. I mean, the world today, when I got started in business, goes back forever, the creative economy was essentially minuscule, a percent. Today it's probably a third, growing fast. The number of jobs you can apply for is going down. And so to me, it's like we always think of the world in terms of either or, college or career, STEM or liberal arts, none of those distinctions make a shred of sense, right? And so to me, I think the opportunity, if you have the luxury of creating a grade 7 through 12 from scratch, is to say, if you are going to lose sleep at night over whether your kid will look slightly better than a million other nearly identical applicants to an Ivy League school, you won't want your kid here. Your kid might love it, but you'll be miserable and you'll make everybody else miserable. So go away. But before you go away, please understand that the parents that wage war year in and year out to push their kid to get into the right college often have very broken relationships with their kids and very unhappy kids. So just keep that in mind when you think you're doing the right thing for your kid. Step back and say, what do we want our kids to accomplish in these great years? And like a book I cite, somebody else's book, but one I love was this Mac Bledsoe, who wrote this book, Parenting with Dignity, who said, your goal as a parent is, when you have a newborn, you make all their decisions, and your goal as a parent ought to be that when they're 18, they make all of their decisions, not most of their decisions or their low stakes decisions or whatever. They make all of their decisions. I think schools should have the same goal. Our objective here is to make ourselves irrelevant. We want passionate, motivated, self-directed learners who've gotten good at the skills to create initiatives that will make the world better, and have the entrepreneurial mindsets to know how to turn that into a fulfilling career path that at the same time makes them a productive, contributing citizen. And I think that's very doable. I think actually you'll exceed that, right? But I think that where the piece that I think, and I had this discussion, Tony Wagner and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and we sort of, we said in some ways the biggest failing of progressive education was to lose sight of the fact that kids need some pragmatic competencies, and so if
Yeah. Yep.
if you don't leave school, and I'm not all about career. I hope people who read it. I often say my English background was way better than a PhD in engineering for technology business. So I'm a big liberal arts fan. I am a big believer that school needs to do a lot of things besides career preparation. But I also think it's tragic, inexplicably unacceptable that kids who've been in school 16 years, let alone 12, leave with nothing to offer for a career. And that's true. I mean, I've interviewed way too many college seniors and I said, what are you good at today that day one an employer would value? And very often the answer is nothing, or they'll say, well, I'm an accounting major, but then you talk to the employers and say, actually, I wish they hadn't taken accounting because they think they know it, but we do it quite differently. So we got to teach them from scratch, whatever. So I think that idea of saying we want to make sure at a minimum our kids come out with great citizenship skills, and we're going to invent our ways to do that. We're going to make sure that they have, with or without college, the ability to pursue an amazing career path. Well, suddenly that fear over which college you get into, because today most people, when you ask why does the kid have to get into the right college, they say, well, they have to get into the right college to get the right job. But I call bullshit on that. That's just not true, right? Because I see lots of young kids creating great jobs without college, fun, interesting, fulfilling, creative jobs. And so if you start to say that, and then say, by the way, we think we can actually get 3 balls in the air. We're going to have kids that are intellectually curious, so great citizens, great career paths with or without college, and just brimming with intellectual curiosity. And if you want a young adult like that, we're their place. And along the way, you may have to well, wait a minute, my next door neighbor's kid is taking all these AP courses, but honestly, I sort of dumped before on college admissions officers, but they're an experienced college admissions officer is pretty good at seeing through that. And over again, I actually loved the film. It premiered at Sundance, called Try Harder with an exclamation point. And they show these kids at Lowell High School, which is a magnet school in San Francisco, where the kids are told from, birth, you have to go to, in San Francisco, Stanford. And anything less. I mean, one of the kids they interview says, well, I know I've got to get into one of these 20 schools or I'll never accomplish anything in my life. And these kids go through all this stuff they hate. And over again, none of them, they're not getting into their first choice colleges. And but you realize that these parents are micromanaging these kids, they're laying out every single step in the kid's life. And I think admissions officers, particularly the experienced ones, and it's a lottery, your kid might get an inexperienced one who's going to be risk averse, or you might get an experienced one. But I say, if it's a lottery and the experienced ones can see through the manufactured kid and might actually value the kid that did something really creative and bold, and which kid are you going to have a better relationship with?
Right, right, yes.
What, you want to have a kid you're not on speaking terms with because you pushed them to do a bunch of stuff they didn't care about, and then they get turned down at all their top choice colleges because they look like a kid that just did what their parents told them to do?
Right. I mean, you've taught the child to be risk averse, right? And everything we've ever learned in our lives, we've learned from failing. We don't learn anything from succeeding. I mean, maybe we learn that it's fun or whatever, but we don't really learn a lot from success. And those kids become risk averse, and so they learn less. They're actually less capable.
Where I have a slightly different take on it. I mean, having been through, in the land of startups, I could say that failing is no picnic.
No, I'm with you.
And you learn from failing. The thing I think you learn the most from is just pushing yourself into an ambiguous situation. It's like I don't know how this will go. My instincts say I can make something of it. I'm going to take a run at it.
Mhm.
And, doing that in small, safe ways when as that's what our pre-K kids do. I mean, like our young kids do that.
Absolutely.
They are like barging into ambiguity, but like our older kids often fear ambiguity. And I think that ability, because that's what I found, like in my, I backed, not, anyway, I backed a lot of startup companies, one, two people's companies, and almost all of them succeeded. And none of them succeeded with their business plan. They all changed in a million
Right,
different ways. They
right.
were all
But
saying,
little failures along the way that taught them how
yeah,
they needed to be flexible.
little failures that led to
Big
bigger
success.
successes.
Yeah.
And so, but they didn't fear it. They said, we're heading in this direction. We think we're heading in a good direction.
Yep.
We know we're going to have to change course many times, but we want, and that's why when, this is when schools say, well, we're going to make a lot of changes here. We're putting together a 5-year strategic plan.
Yeah.
I say, good luck. Change is done. You will not do it. Like that'll go through some committee. It'll take 18 months to come out. And by the time it comes out, nobody will be happy with it. That's why I love this. We really do buy into these small steps lead to big change.
Right.
Support and celebrate not better teachers, but innovative classroom experiences, and give people cover to invent and create their own in their own way. And if half the teachers in a school do that, and it's half of a student's time in that with those teachers, I take that as a big win.
Absolutely. If we could get 50%, that would be incredible, because 50% would turn the tide. That would do it. No, nobody would want any other experience, because I think once you have an experience in a school with teachers and administration where they are actually listening to you and helping you become, and I really actually hate this expression, the best version of yourself, but I really do love the uniqueness of each child, of each human. And I think that we all have some particular course that we're meant to be on, and something that great that we're meant to do. And it's only in ignoring that and trying to be something that we're not, where we fail. And I mean fail in a way that's not good.
Yeah. And what the reason I'm such a believer in these little steps is when teachers or school, class, whatever, try these little blocks, like 20 minutes of curiosity time where kids on their own come up with a thought-provoking question or two, and then
Yes.
small safe groups trade notes so they don't risk embarrassment, and then share those out. What happens is the kid comes home, it's a different kid. And the parents see that, and they'll send notes back to these teachers. What happened in school today? My kid actually came home fired up. And for those parents always have other kids, right? And so they'll say, well, my kid got a chance to come up with thought-provoking questions today in his or her class.
Yes.
That seemed to be really interesting. That seemed to get them thinking about things in a different way.
Might
See,
make
why
it
these little things, they will spread.
Yes.
And
Yeah, maybe then we only need 30%.
Well, it won't ever be, if we get to 30%, we'll get to 90%, right? We just have to get past 3 or 4%.
I know. I think we can. I think we can. I know we can. What am I saying? I know we can, because I know once experienced, it has to spread. I know we're actually over time, but I want to ask one more question. If you
Sure.
don't, do you have a minute?
I'm already on the record saying I'll stay as long as you want.
Excellent. So,
Well, can I just say one thing though?
Yes.
I find my heart goes out. I said before about teachers, like you spend an hour or two. Some days I'll spend like 3 or 4 hours on Zoom, and I'll say to my wife, I am so exhausted. I just need we don't have a hot tub, but I need a hot tub or something. And then you realize that these teachers are spending like 7, 8, 9 hours a day. I mean, how you do it, I don't know, but you guys are amazing. There you go.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate thing to say. If you're doing that right now, we're behind you, because that's rough. And maybe my question helps with this. Now, because I think there's all kinds of innovation, and we tend to get charged up about it, and sometimes people see snazzy technologies, or even just big test scores, and that attracts investment. And yet some of the greatest things I read in this book were happening in places where investment was still needed, but they weren't able to make the case to get the investment because it didn't look snazzy. And I'm just wondering, what do we do? Help us to know how we can demonstrate that what we're doing in these small schools with, not a lot of laptops, but a lot of and a lot of student-led learning is superior to the snazzy.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's so many issues here. I mean, I always apologize on behalf of a lot of people with business backgrounds because I honestly think they've largely botched their efforts in education and
Well-meaning,
the
but
amount of money, the amount of money that's gone into, places, like would anybody really want their kid in a school where your kids are wetting their pants because they won't let them out of the classroom to go to the bathroom or where I mean there are schools out there. I mean these are schools getting big checks where like you can't talk to a classmate during lunch because it slows you down. Like like and as I said, I can relate. My 15-year ago self. Better test scores, more kids graduating high school, more kids going to four-year college. Do that better. This is clearly it. I think as well, a lot of business people just have an allergic reaction to unions, and they'll tell me all the time, they'll say, well, you'll never get these schools to change because of those darn teachers unions. And I'll say, it's kind of interesting. They're my biggest supporter. I mean, they read my book and and they say, yes, like we want to be held accountable. We just would like to have a voice in it and like it to make sense. It doesn't seem like an unreasonable point of view. The thing that I like about, where you're headed, and it's kind of the discussion we had about high school, but also even in the lower grades, is when kids start to take on initiatives that make their world better. And that can be in huge number of forms. It can be a mural, on an abandoned building. It can be a science project that may, test water quality. It can be just like, you name the area, it can be all, great journalism covering local issues. But when the local community starts to see that these kids and their teachers are actually contributing back to their community and kids are on fire with that, I think that's when you start to see outpourings of support. And that's why I'm a big fan of these equipping kids with these skills so they can actually demonstrate, public exhibitions that draw in local businesses and nonprofits and the town council and the mayor, and they look and they see. But I ask these, what I found is, so a lot of the big check writers in business, I think, have been counterproductive. But I find that if schools go to businesses with well thought out requests, businesses can be quite generous. They're not just going to sort of knock on doors and say, can we give you money or equipment or mentors or whatever. But if a school approaches businesses or a set of schools approaches a local business community with well thought out requests, but also evidence that their kids are coming through a school experience able to make that community better, I think you find businesses actually will bend over backwards. And I think it gets to the survival and actually the thriving of a lot of communities that are at risk of being left behind. And I'll try to be brief, but I think when a community that the manufacturing jobs are gone, where it's just hanging on by its fingernails, if they play the college for all lottery, every once in a while a kid will leave and go off to an Ivy League and they'll say our kids can do it too, but that kid doesn't come back. And so that community is left with a lot of kids that went through a process and they leave school not good at anything particular. And so they're adrift and the community's adrift and there really isn't a future. My friends Jim and Deb Fallows wrote a book called Our Towns. They're going to have a documentary that'll be out soon on HBO. They went all over the country looking for communities on the upswing. What did they find? Career academy high schools and agile community colleges. I go all over the country looking for schools, and I'm an advocate not for career academies for some kids, but aspects of career for all kids. Can be new economy skills, can be traditional economy skills, can be a blend. But I sort of say, why the heck aren't we asking kids to get good at something the world values and get that sense of confidence and pride from getting good at something that, they're not on this call, but I've got a nephew who struggled in school mightily, hated school, didn't want to go to college. He's now in a culinary institute. And my sister sends me these updates on him all the time about he's just on fire. He just loves it. And the Culinary Institute doesn't care about, his SAT scores. They want a passion for cooking. And is that kid going to find his way forward? Absolutely. But you talk to middle and high school kids about culinary, it's a great way to teach chemistry. physics,
Yes, absolutely.
economics. You know, I mean, it's a window to all these great things.
Well,
But
it's true, and it's not siloed. It's not. We're teaching. I like to say we don't get up in the morning and do our language arts part of our lives or part of our careers from 9 to 10, and then math from 10 to 11, and then a little science from 11 to 12. We just don't live like that. And so a study like cooking of any kind
people
is
want to make a difference. People want to contribute to things. And I think when school has let them down and they see that they're in a dead-end job or they've been laid off and whatever, when they're said that in my book. I said when too many people are alienated and adrift, they're willing to, I think this is pretty much a direct quote, they're willing to throw hand grenades into the ballot box or worse. And I think that's our opportunity to empower kids with the kinds of skills and mindsets that will serve them well going forward. But it's also the urgent crisis.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, Ted, we've taken a lot of your time and we've learned
great.
so much.
And thanks for all you're doing. You do amazing things. This is like an honor for me, a total treat. And,
well, we love it. We love education here at Slate School, and we love to learn from other people. And that's what makes these evenings so special for us. And tonight has been a real treat. So I do hope when things level out that you will come and visit us at Slate School, because we would love to have you here. And we're going to lean on your advice and what school could be, the site, and that's going to help us a tremendous amount as we go forward in building our upper school. So I'm grateful to you already.
Awesome. Well, this has been a treat. So I really, we had a hailstorm earlier, so I was worried we were going to lose electricity. So
no kidding. Oh my goodness.
So I'm not in Texas. I feel so sorry for, people are slammed. But anyway, we're in Virginia, but we got hail here. Yeah,
at the end of every meeting at Slate School, and every morning meeting, we kind of close with something called positive rice. And we just send it out to anybody who needs it. And so close tonight with some positive rice to you, Ted, for your hailstorm, and to everybody in Texas and all over the country dealing with so many different challenging things, but also positive rice to go ahead and make the changes that we need to make. And we can do it. We can definitely do it. We can do it. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Positive rice from Slate School. You take care too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.